Okay, well, thank you all for coming, and I'm glad to be here. Whenever I start one of these things, I'm not always sure how to begin. But John talked about the Theosophical Society and how scientific inquiry is part of your tradition. So I'm going to talk tonight about a method of healing that is a scientific method that leads to spiritual wholeness. And I didn't know I was going to say that until you brought it up.
Thank you.
And I do have an outline. And I promised some people that I would follow the outline. So I'm going to do my best. It's not my best thing. It's not my tall suit as following outlines. But I'm going to do my best. So, yes, I'm a social worker, a medical hypnoanalyst, a neurotherapist, and an EMDR practitioner. And before I talk more about myself, I want to introduce my new associate, Brandy Allen. So Brandy, if you would stand up. Brandy just got certified as a hypnotherapist. She's joining us at the Light Heart Center after completing her internship with us. So we're glad to have Brandy on board. Okay, so those three methods, and I'm going to lay this out for you so that you can understand how we get to the spiritual development in this process. Now, people come in to see me primarily. I had for these 6 problems. Now, I had a poster on this, but I forgot it. I took two of the same posters. Anyway, people come for anxiety, depression, fear, guilt, self-punishment, the void from a spiritual exhaustion and low self-esteem, and addictions. So I'm going to start with the bottom one, addictions. When a person has an addiction, it's really a solution to some other problem. When a person gives up their addiction, smoking, alcohol, shopping, whatever it might be, then we're dealing with the top 6. So these are the top 6 problems that people come in with. So anxiety is the most common. And there are about 100 symptoms of anxiety. Dr. Zelling, Daniel Zelling is a well-known medical hypnoanalyst, he says that at least 50% of doctor visits are anxiety because there are 100 different symptoms of anxiety. We can get anxiety in our vision, in our body, in our breath, our eyes, our ears, all parts of the body, our perception. The classic one is that when somebody has so much anxiety, they get a panic attack or an anxiety attack, and they end up in the ER, right? The ER doc, they think they're going to die. The ER doc examines them, says, "You're fine," gives them a shot or a pill, and sends them on their way. So but there are 100 different symptoms of anxiety, and they can manifest in the body all over. Depression. Depression, we call that, hypnoanalysts, we call that a walking zombie syndrome, like a walking dead person. And we can die in our mind, our body, or our spirit. 3 dimensions of humanity, of being a human. So we can die in any one of those, and it manifests as depression. Let's talk about fear. We're only born with 2 fears. Do you know what they are? Just yell it out. Anybody know?
Yeah. Falling.
Falling, yeah, and loud noises.
Love and fear.
Yes. Very good. Guilt and self-punishment. When we lose our own self-love, and we're all born with a certain amount of self-love, when we lose that, a lot of times that vacuum creates guilt. And after you're guilty, what happens next? Punish yourself. Now, can you think of any good ways to punish yourself? Smoking, maybe? Overeating? Over drinking, there are lots of ways people punish themselves. Just being negative to oneself. Okay, the void from the spiritual exhaustion. Now, this is an important concept because just about everybody who comes to me, I help them to find inside of themselves the bliss state. It's what I call the bliss state. It's where we feel connected to God, the universe, everything in it. We're totally at peace. And we feel just even and calm. We all have that. And that's one of the beauties of this method, is that I find that time in a person's life and get it to come back, get it to come to a person's life in the here and now, so that we have access to that particular state. We all have it. What happens, though, is very often we lose it early in life and we forget that we had it, and then the negative things pile on top. One on top of another on top of another, and frequently people say, well, I've always been negative, I've always had this, I've always been depressed, etc., and so on. But that's not true. Because who are we really? Aren't we a soul? We don't have a soul, we are a soul, we have a body. Wouldn't we all agree, everybody here, that we're a soul, a spirit being occupying a physical body? Yes. Now, I have some people who disagree with that. And they say, no, I don't have any of that. But they can agree that they're part of nature, part of creation. So if you don't agree with this, you can agree that maybe you're part of nature and part of creation. The next one is low self-esteem. That's a big one, and that should be up here higher. I forgot about it, put it at the bottom. But it doesn't belong there. So as a spirit being, having a physical existence, we were created by God, right? The universe, whatever you want to say, right? And did that agency, whatever it is, create us to feel like a slug and no good and unhappy and worthless and deserving of punishment and ashamed and all those things? I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think that we were created with that. At least it's been in my experience from what I do with people. And now I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story, about how I got into this. So some of you who was here at the Ossifest? Okay, a couple of you may have heard this story before. But so bear with me while I tell the other people this story. So it was back in 1969. My buddies and I decided to take this trip. And we're going to go to Lake Geneva. Once we get to Lake Geneva, we're going to take this other trip on LSD. So we take this trip, this LSD trip. And it was the worst thing, and in retrospect, one of the best things that I ever did. First, I'll go to the worst part, because our brain has a negative bias. We need to have a negative bias. We can't get away from that. So anyway, we took this LSD, and I had this hallucination where there was this cola guy, this black guy. Some of you are maybe old enough to remember the cola guy. He was on TV, and he had a commercial. So he was swinging in my head on a trapeze, and he's swearing at me, and he's telling me, you're going to have the worst MF in life, and he's laughing and going on and on and on, calling me stupid and all kinds of swear words. This is in my brain talking to me. So, and I was high for 2 weeks from that LSD trip. It's true. And I had other things, things were flying around, that cured me of wanting to take any more trips. Matter of fact, I didn't go to Lake Geneva for 20 more years. So I never took LSD again. This turned my whole life around. I was a pool player, and I didn't want to be anything when I grew up. I quit high school because they wanted me to get up at so darn early in the morning. So I couldn't deal with it. So I just quit and played pool. Anyway, once this happened, not only did I quit the LSD, but I quit smoking pot, quit smoking cigarettes, quit drinking coffee. I quit eating sugar. I read Sugar Blues and changed my whole life around. Went to college. Before that, I wasn't, I was just playing pool. So this whole thing turned my whole life around. So it was really a good experience in retrospect. But somebody needed to be kicked in the butt. I guess that's what I needed. Thank you, subconscious mind. Okay, now that brings me to this is what Albert Einstein said about the subconscious mind. The rational mind is a humble servant. The intuitive mind, the faithful gift. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. This is how important the subconscious mind is. And I'm going to talk more about that in a minute, because that's what we're after, is subconscious analysis. Rooting out the things in our subconscious mind that prevent us to being all we want to be. So just a little bit about my story. After that, at 21 years old, I went to college, and I had so much anxiety sitting in class. I felt like my heart was going to come out of my chest. I felt like I was going to pee my pants. I'd go to the bathroom, and I didn't have to pee. It was just all anxiety. So I went, and I looked for help. I went to one of my professors at the school I was attending, and he sent me a psychiatrist, and he put me on some drugs. It didn't work, so I quit. I didn't quit school, I just couldn't do the drugs. So then I tried all different kinds of therapies for years. From about the age 21 till I got to be somewhere in my 30s, when I had already become a social worker. I went through college, went through graduate school, and tried different types of therapy. And then finally, thank God, I got to a medical hypnoanalyst in Joliet. Her name was Pat Honiotis. And if you're watching, hi Pat, lives in California right now. She got out of me, this is what came out of me, out of my subconscious mind. When I was under a year old, I was in the bathroom and I had slid under the water and I was drowning. And my father, he came and picked me up, and rescued me. And I was up above, looking down, ready to exit. So that was my first spiritual experience out of the body. Anyway, so he rescued me, and I came back, decided I was going to stay around for a while. And this was the cause of the anxiety I had. I would get so much anxiety when I was in what felt like a tight spot. Sitting in class felt like enclosed to me. So I had that so bad during high school, I couldn't be in the building because I felt so oppressed in high school. So that's why I quit. But anyway, so once I got that out of me, boom, that anxiety all went away. I didn't have it anymore. It was amazing. So that started me. And there were a couple other events, and then there was a priest that tried to fool around with me when I was about 10. So after that, it was in the church, in the front door, and out the back door very quickly. I didn't want to be around the church. So during this time, after that happened, after I recovered from that anxiety, it freed me up a lot because I had so much anxiety. It affected a lot of things in my life. So what I did then is I started investigating more about the spiritual realm. But backing up, when I was 17, actually, I became a Rosicrucian. I had moved out of my house and got an apartment. And so every month they would send me a monograph and I'd study it and meditate and work on developing my spiritual side. But like I said, I had this anxiety that colored everything. So after that, after I became a social worker and a medical hypnoanalyst, after it helped me, then I decided I had to learn it. So I went and took the training, which was a two-year training program on how to analyze the subconscious mind. And that's what my expertise is. Not so much in hypnosis. Hypnosis is the method. It's similar to anesthesia. If you go for an operation, the doctor, and if you're going to have your appendix out or you're going to have something like that, they put you under anesthesia. Hypnosis is similar, although you're not out. You're aware of everything that's going on in hypnosis. It just looks like you're sleeping. The real star of the show is the subconscious analysis in removing the negativity from a person's subconscious mind. So I want to go back to a couple of things that I did. One of the things I did, my partner and I, Renee, started the Light Heart Center. We had a fellow named David Jackson. Does anybody know of him? He's been gone for 25 years at least. Anyway, he was a channeler, and I've never, ever come across anybody like him before. He used to come to our office. He would go in trance, and then our spirit guides would speak through him. His voice would change. He'd have a female voice, male voices. He had all these different things that happened. And his story is a very interesting one too. But because of time's sake, I just want to show you what he did. This is the reason I brought this. This is one of my first experiences with spirituality. David drew this when he was in trance with his eyes closed. And this is a picture of me in a past life. Now, whether I can't verify that, but that's what he said. And he drew it with his eyes closed. I was there, I watched it. He's doing this, and I'm going like this in front of his face. His eyes are closed. It was amazing. I've never met anybody since that time who was such a channeler, and he drew amazing things. Everybody who went for him for a session would get a picture like this if you wanted it. He drew this in chalk from one of our past lives. And then he would channel either our higher selves, our spirit guides, et cetera, and so on. It was amazing. So that's what started me being more interested in the spirit realm. I even went to the psychic surgeons, the Filipino psychic surgeons. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of them or seen them. So what they did is I was lying there, just with a towel on, and these two guys came over and they said, well, you have something in your stomach. And they did this rubbing on and they pulled out this black stuff. Came out of my stomach. There were no cuts or anything. And I thought maybe they had it under their sleeve and they were, pulling it out. But no. And then actually, after they did that, I felt like I was operated on. That was amazing. Not only that, but I had, right about that time, I'm cutting through time quickly, I had an out-of-body experience. My life was kind of going haywire. I didn't know why. So here this one night, what happens is I wake up, I'm sitting on the edge of my bed, my body's over there, but my spirit self is sitting on the edge of my bed, and I'm thinking, wow, what's going on here? And that was one of the most amazing experiences because it was totally calm. There was no anxiety, and all of a sudden, poof, appears this woman. she starts communicating with me telepathically. No words, just talking to me. It was the most amazing experience I ever had. Until I started taking people to see John of God down in Brazil. You all know of John of God? Everybody? Okay. How many have been there? Nobody? Anyway, John of God is the real thing, real deal. I made a video, and it's on YouTube. It's called The Spiritual Ministry, the Healing Ministry of John of God. And just to make a long story short, I saw him one time. There's a woman on stage like this, and he went into trance. The entities entered him. There were 20 different entities that enter him, and then they were medical doctors, and they do operations on people. There was a woman standing there. She had a tumor about the size of my fist in her back. So Joao is his name. He goes into trance, and so all of a sudden, Joao's gone. Here's the spirit entity, and the nurses bring him over as scalpels and stuff. So he takes a scalpel, and he cuts this woman's back open. She's standing there. I had a medical doctor with me too at this trip, and I'm going to tell you about that. So he cuts her open, and he pulls this tumor out of her, squeezes all the tumor out and the blood, sews her back up. Later, I interviewed her, and she said, well, I knew he was working on me, but I didn't feel a thing. Another really cool thing down there was I did bring a medical doctor with me one time. His name was Doug from Indiana. So Joao was again in trance, and he had cut this woman open here in her gut like this. And he stuck his fingers in there, and he pulled out something. I don't know quite what it was. So he starts sewing her up, and Doug is standing right there. I'm videotaping it, and he motions to Doug, and he hands Doug the needle. Okay, so Doug, he's shaking because he's going, this can't be true. So he goes to sew her up, and the wound closes up. All by itself. Swear to God. This happened. And there was a whole room full of crutches and wheelchairs and glasses. The guy's, what he does is amazing. But he also says, it's not me. He's got a 3rd grade education. He says, this is the power of God. So that to me, and here's the thing he did for me. So one day, I'm in the current meditating, and I became what's called the son of the house, and there's a group of mediums, and we were all there in what's called the current room. It's where the mediums go and meditate. So he calls me over, and he says, through the interpreter, he says, you wanted to see this for a long time, so come with me. So he grabs me, puts me in this rocking chair. There's a chair of Solomon. He comes over and puts his hands on my head like this. Boom, poof, I'm in the spirit world. And I'm holding on to the chair, right? And I'm in the spirit world, though. And I'm holding on for dear life thinking, okay, I'm going to fly out of here any second. But it was really cool because they were serving tea and they were talking, and it was very light and airy, like just similar to that woman that appeared to me that one time, the angel, I guess you'd call her, but she had no wings. And so that convinced me, okay, the spirit world is real. I've seen all this stuff. I've done all this stuff. So I know that I am a spirit being having a physical existence. So now, back to this story. That's my story. That's how I got to be doing what I'm doing. And now I've been doing it for 35 years or longer. And these are the problems that people come in with. Now I want to give you some examples of clients that I've treated who've come in and healed themselves. The first one that I want to talk about, this is one of my favorite stories. I had a golfer. He's 25 years old. He came in and he wasn't playing very well. He was living in his car. His parents were supporting him, and he's going around to all these golf teachers trying to get better. But he just couldn't get anywhere. So he came to me, And I put them through my process. And the process involves, it's a medical model. And a medical model means that we test and we know what we're treating before we treat it, as opposed to other models. Some models just shoot at anything that moves. And I'm going to give you an example of that in a minute. But the medical model, so it involves a complete history, 2 word wisdom association tests under hypnosis, and a dream, a post-hypnotic dream suggestion about the cause of the person's problem. So the long story short, this guy came in and the number 5 was all over the place. His dream had 5 in it, his wisdom test showed 5, his history said 5, all kinds of 5s. I regress him back to a time when he's 5 years old. This is what he comes up with. Now, he didn't come in talking about this. This was in the subconscious mind. He's 5 years old, his parents get divorced, he overeats, gets fat. That's only a piece of it. The other kids make fun of it. He decides, I don't want to be who I am, because he feels so ashamed about being who he is. So he decides, I'm going to be somebody else. Now, can you do that? No, you can't be somebody else. You can only pretend it for a while, right? But you can't really be it. And this is why it wasn't working in his golf. Because he was going to all these golf teachers trying to be them. Once his adult mind, the conscious mind, reviewed what he decided at 5 years old in the subconscious state, he decided, well, I can't be anybody else, I have to be me. Changed his whole life. He got a job, got out of the car, got on the PGA Tour, started his own business. He had an alcoholic girlfriend, he broke up with her, found another gal, got married. He's doing really well. This is what I'm talking about subconscious healing. Okay, but there's another piece of it. I want to give you another example. I had a woman who came to me. She was in her mid-40s. She had gone to a lot of therapy. And she had guilt. She couldn't get rid of it. No amount of therapy seemed to get the guilt away. So I put her through the process. Like I said, it's the history, word wisdom associations, and the dream analysis. All her information pointed to a time in the womb. I regressed her back before she was born. Lo and behold, her mother was having such trouble with being pregnant. She was blaming the fetus. Many times complaining about how the fetus was causing her to feel miserable and depressed and throwing up and all the morning sickness. So the baby heard all that, took it on, and just had guilt. So once she realized that it wasn't her, that she didn't do anything wrong, that she picked this up by accident, she let it go. Changed the guilt. I had a Vietnam vet who came to me, and he was drinking and beating his wife. So he wanted help from me. So I put him through my process, and here's what comes out of him in his subconscious mind. There were 2 things. The first thing was that when he was in Vietnam, he and his 2 other buddies were out. He was a platoon leader or whatever, something like that. Anyway, they got blown up. The last thing he remembers is his buddy saying, "Don't let me die." So this guy, he wakes up a month later in a military hospital. His legs are blown off. He came to me, he was in a wheelchair. Legs gone. He's got guilt. He didn't know. When he came in to talk to me, he didn't know that he had the guilt from that scene in Vietnam. So once he relived that, he decided he didn't need to be guilty. He couldn't protect the guy and keep him from dying. He let it go. One more example. I had a woman recently who came and she had depression. She was drinking a little bit and she was depressed. And here's what came out of her subconscious mind. In the word wisdom test, I say, I died when. And this particular person said, when my aunt died. So I regressed her back to the time when this person died. And lo and behold, in her subconscious mind, she decided that she would rather be dead and be with the loved one rather than stay on earth. And once she reviewed that, she let go of her depression, stopped her drinking, and has been doing very well. So now all of those examples are they're pretty much the kind of stuff that people come to me for. However, I didn't talk about the spiritual component. In each one of those cases, reliving what's called the initial sensitizing event for their problem is a part of it. But I also brought each one of those people back to their bliss state. In some people, it's way back in the womb. Some people, it's right after birth. It's where they feel connected. I talked about this before. It's where they feel connected to God, the universe, and everything in it. Because we're all created with a certain amount of self-love. And the things that happen to us start chipping away at that, especially if it's not reinforced by our caretakers. We start losing our self-love. We start blaming ourselves, start finding ourselves guilty of things. If we think about Genesis in the Bible, God created heaven and earth and all the animals and everything. Now, God gave us dominion over the earth and the animals, right? Did God give us dominion over ourselves in the Christian tradition? No, He didn't. We don't have jurisdiction to judge ourselves because we are not objective. So we can't judge ourselves, but we do. So just staying along this line of Christianity, what are the royal commandments? Anybody? Okay, when the Pharisees came to Jesus, let me back up. God made a promise to Abraham. What was the promise? I'm sending you a Savior, right? Okay, so then, some 400 years later, He gave Moses the 10 Commandments. And the 10 Commandments were there to help us, to help humanity live until the Savior showed up. Then when the Savior showed up, what happened? 10 Commandments, they're null and void. Jesus says, the Pharisees come to Him, they say, Jesus, what's the greatest commandment unto the law? They're trying to trip Him up so they can hang Him. Jesus says, no problem. The first is love God with your whole heart, your whole mind, and your whole soul. The second is the same as the first. Love your neighbor as yourself. On these two hang everything else. It's in the Bible. It's in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They all say it. The royal commandments. 2 commandments. That's it. So once the Savior came, He said, these are the commandments. Then when He died for everybody's sins, right? All the future sins, everybody's sins, or did He leave somebody out? Frequently, people come in and I talk to them about this and they're telling me, well, He must have left me out. But we don't have the jurisdiction. God never gave us jurisdiction to judge ourselves. God reserves that for Himself because we're not objective. Anyway, that's how that's part of what we have to work with. And then by going back in time to that time in the subconscious where we feel that sense of self-love and total peace, to grab onto it and bring it to the here and now. That's why this scientific method is a spiritual method, because everybody who comes gets that. If they're depressed, if they're anxious, if they have low self-esteem, if they have guilt or fear, I always do this so that they leave with that experience. And then they have a choice whether to reinforce the positive or keep the negative. We need to have, our mind has a negative bias. Because if we didn't have that, we'd burn ourselves on the stove every time. So we have to have a negative bias. It's survival. So, okay. One more example. I had a fellow who came to me, and he came to me and he said, I'm coming to you, I'm doing this crazy thing because I don't want my doctor or my lawyer to know, my doctor or my minister to know what's going on. I said, okay, tell me what's happening. I'm being abducted by aliens at night, he says. Okay, so I didn't question that because this happens. So I put him through my whole process. I put him through the whole history, the word wisdom exams, the dream analysis. I find nothing. I'm wondering what's going on with this guy. But he has a dream. He has a dream. If I remember it exactly, it was something like he's having a dream in the dream. And the dream is about a past life. So I regress into a past life. Lo and behold, what happens? He was a kid, he was abducted and killed in a past life. So once I got that out of his subconscious mind, the aliens went away. There are no more aliens. It was done. So one more example. I had somebody who came to me, a woman, she's been in therapy 25 years. She in group and individual, 25 years in therapy. And I wondered, well, why are you coming to me? You've been in 20. Well, she said, I still don't feel quite right. She said, my therapy has been focusing on my alcoholic father and the Catholic Church. So, okay, but that didn't cure her of whatever. I think she felt angry. She just didn't feel at peace and she didn't have a good self-esteem. So out of her subconscious mind, here's what comes. She's 4 years old. She's in the doctor's office. The doctor has his fingers in her and he's pleasuring himself. He's abusing her. Her mother's in the waiting room, didn't want to tell the mother. So took on the shame and felt like she allowed the doctor to do it. So her emotional development stopped there at 4 years old. Because you can't, when you have something like that, you take on this huge negative kind of shame, guilt, locus of control, and it stops people's emotional development. So that, many people have had incest, sex abuse, these kinds of things in childhood. This affects the subconscious mind. So not only do we need to, if a person has that, let it come to the surface and make new decisions about oneself, namely that the child didn't make it happen, the child's not in charge or guilty of anything, and that it's okay to start changing, becoming the person you are meant to be. Again, that person, I went back to find her bliss state. We found it, and it changed her. Those are the many examples I've had. I've had lots of things. I've had people who've been impregnated by aliens and the baby's taken, incubus and succubus attacks at night, and of course all of these things. Pretty much. So, okay, so I followed the outline. My high school teacher would be proud. The two I had. Anyway, so there are a couple things I want to talk about because this always comes up. This always comes up when I talk about this. There are two fallacies, kind of like two fallacies in the New Age movement. The one is that if we focus on something negative, it makes it grow. Now, think about that logically. If you got a pain in your stomach or in your side or somewhere, and you need an operation, you need something to change, if you focus on it, it doesn't make it grow. You focus on it so you know what to do. And when we used to have cameras, Polaroid cameras, remember those? So remember, you'd press the button and the thing would come out and it wouldn't look like anything for a while? That was the negative, right? And then the positive picture would show up. So you can't have the positive unless you have the negative. They're connected. There's two sides. You have to see it all. You have to get your arms around the whole thing. The other one is Ken Wilber. Anybody ever know who Ken Wilber is, right? John knows. Ken Wilber. He's a very intellectual spiritual writer. He talks about bypassing. Now, bypassing is very popular. We're not going to focus on the negative because we don't want it to grow. We're just jumping to love and light. Because if we focus on the negative, we're going to grow it, and it's going to take us over, and we're going to be all negative. So we're just going to jump over to be love and light. But that doesn't really work. We can pretend that. It doesn't make it true. Like actors, on TV and in the movies, doesn't make they're not real. They're playing a character. It's the same thing. The bypassing. Ken Wilber talks about how we need to deal with this stuff that's in here so we can really get transcendent experiences, so we can become the person we were really meant to be and the person we would like to be. So those are the two fallacies. Now the last thing, I left the last thing for last. I talked about all this. Where does love come from? Now, frequently, so many times, there's even a book, I don't remember the author's name, who talks about teaching people to love themselves and how hard it is. And I find that true, that it is hard sometimes. Some people embrace it like, oh yeah, I've been waiting for this. Give it to me. As soon as we get the negative out. So where does love come from? You guys, thoughts?
Choice.
Three places. It comes from three places. What are they? Think now. God, right? Oneself, other people, right? Okay, so from my point of view, a balanced person divides that into thirds. So a third from God, a third from yourself, a third from other people. Now just suppose you're a person who's trying to get 100% from other people. What does that do? Huh? You can't do it, can you? That's what kids do, don't they? Kids do that. And you can't do it. You can't get it all from other people. Now, on the opposite extreme, what about if you're a person who's, I'm not getting anything from other people, I'm going all to God? How does that work? That doesn't work that well either. I mean, God's busy, right? He's got other things to do. He's got a whole universe to run. You know how big our universe is? It's huge. And we're this tiny little planet spinning around at the edge of it. So, but the oneself, learning to love yourself, and I'm not talking about being a narcissist. I'm not mentioning any names, but narcissism is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a healthy self-love, taking good care of yourself, giving yourself positive direction, and being kind to yourself, being generous, those kinds of things. That's what I'm talking about. So loving yourself. So it comes from 3 places. And that's one of the things that I work with people to build on. And this is why it's called medical hypnoanalysis, but it's really a spiritual thing. Almost every client, I have to deal with that. And I do it as a matter of course so that they get to their bliss state and they know who they really are. A spirit being having a physical existence. Not the reverse. We're not just a bunch of, I'm not a behaviorist. You know about behaviorists? Behaviorists believe that we're just a bunch of automatic responses programmed into our brain. We have that, but that's not all we are. We're more. I know, I've been in the spirit world a lot. We take with us the I, me, I was there. It wasn't like I was down here and there was I was there. Several occasions. I had those experiences.
Correct. Thank you so much, Ryan.
You're welcome.
Can I ask the first question this evening? Because I personally, I'm very interested, and I think the audience may be as well. Could you speak just a little more in detail or some detail of what that process that you use actually entails? You mentioned something about the process by which you get to the root.
The subconscious, yes. Okay. The process that I use to get to the subconscious mind it's a complete history. Social history, medical history, family history, sexual history, trauma history, everything. I ask just about everything. I know more about a person than anybody ever, usually. And just by doing that, that's curative in itself for a lot of people. Then, in a hypnotic state, I administer 2 word wisdom association exams. And basically, I say words and phrases to a person, and a person says whatever comes to their mind. And those exams work on the principle of this. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. And what that does is, by doing that and learning how to fashion the sentences and the statements from the person's history and from the stock phrases and whatnot that I use, I get some idea where their problem's coming from and what took place in their subconscious mind. There are basically 4 things that happen in the subconscious mind, because our subconscious mind works on survival. The most important thing to us is God love. And how do I know that? Because what will you give your life for? Somebody or something you love, right? Now that's why the politicians, when war comes, remember God Bless America? We had all those wars, God Bless America, that's to get everybody pumped up, willing to go and donate their lives, which is, of course, the sign of a man that you're able to face bullets without fear for your country, something you love. This is why they use that. So this is the most important thing to us. We will sacrifice things that are less important for something that's more important. Our self-esteem is number 2. Now the gunslingers back in the Old West, they would sacrifice their lives for their self-esteem, right? It's commonly called a peeing contest, right? But using guns, it's deadly. So our self-esteem is number 2 in importance. Underneath that is our physical. Air, water, food. We can go without food for longer than water. And we can go without water longer than air. So our physicalness is part of survival too. Underneath that is our territory, which has to do with our money and our property, our job, our things that we're in charge of. So if somebody sticks a gun in you and you're walking in an alley and they say your money or your life, you're giving them your money, right? You want a check? How about a credit card? Leave me alone. Don't kill me, because it's more important. Physical is more important than this. Then sex, our sex drive, is less important than all these other things. A guy loses his job, what's the first thing he's not interested in? There you have it. That's how the subconscious works. It works on the principle of survival. So when a person comes in, I know what level their problem's at, depending on what they're talking about. If it's a God-love issue, if it's self-esteem, it's a physical thing, if it's territorial. So through the word association and the wisdom of the subconscious mind, it starts leading me on a trail. Then I give them a suggestion to have a dream about the cause of their problem. They go home, they wake up, they write the dream down, they bring it into me. It does two things. One, it proves to the client the method's working. I don't know how many times people have come in and say, you know, I didn't think this was going to work. I thought this was hokey. I came up with this dream. I don't know what it means. Here it is. Lots of times. But that's the first part of the process, is getting the subconscious mind working for you instead of against you. Because when we get these negative suggestions in this subconscious mind, and this is all below 7 years old. This is the line right here, below 7 years old. Then these are gone from awareness, and they work against us. A good example of this is fear of flying. Anybody have fear of flying in here? Ever had it? Okay, so some of you know what it means. When do you start feeling the fear?
As soon as I even think about it.
As soon as you think about it. When do you start feeling the fear?
I don't fear it anymore, but I used to on the way to the airport.
Right.
Packing, getting ready to go.
Exactly. Okay, now remember what I said? We have two fears that we're born with, the fear of loud noises and the fear of falling. When we're flying, the fear is of crashing, right? That's the real fear. Crashing and dying, or worse, getting burned and surviving. So that's the real fear. Flying is not the fear. This is the subconscious mind projecting some kind of fear onto the airplane. They're pretty easy to cure. I get them out regularly. So that's an example. So the first part is getting that subconscious mind working for you. Then the second part is taking it out, going back in time to where it started. And you have to go back in the subconscious mind to resolve this. You can't resolve it with the P brain. I call this the P brain.
Can you talk a little bit about EMDR?
Yes, EMDR.
You didn't mention anything.
No, I didn't. EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And what that is, it's a way of moving my hand like this, and the client follows along with their eyes. And what it does is it helps change the negative beliefs that we have in our mind and our subconscious. They change just from doing that. It doesn't get to this negative suggestions like this, but it changes the higher level negativity that feeds into the conscious mind. And here's where it came from. Dr. Francine Shapiro, who trained me in this, what she discovered is that people, when they're outside, tend to feel better. And the only difference between being inside and outside is when we're inside, we tend to stare. When we're outside, our eyes are moving all around all the time. And we feel better. So what Francine did is just mimic being inside with moving her hand like this and having the client follow along. And it works very well. I use that too with people.
You talked about the initial sensitizing event, and if it doesn't take you too far into another explanation, can you explain SPE and SIE?
Yes, certainly. The initial sensitizing event comes from theory of allergies. Now, when people develop an allergy, generally it works like this. Let's say you had a strawberry allergy, and I asked you, when did you develop it? You're going to tell me something like this. Well, I was in grade school, they served strawberry ice cream in school, and I threw up and I got hives. That's the symptom-producing event. The initial sensitizing event is usually earlier, such as when you're a baby, you get strawberry pudding and you just spit it out. You don't have any symptoms. The symptom-producing event. And then after that, it's a symptom-intensifying event. It comes from the theory of allergies. That's how emotional problems, all of these problems, emotional, psychological, spiritual problems manifest. There's an initial sensitizing event. And I told you in the examples, the people that, all the different things that happen to people. And it's under 7 years old. Very rarely does an initial sensitizing event happen older. But sometimes the initial sensitizing event can be childhood, the whole childhood. Let's just say, here's a good example. Let's just say that you grow up in a fairly healthy family, it's fairly functional, there's no alcohol, no drugs, no beatings, nothing like that. It's just that in that family, anger is not okay. So if you're an older woman, you get sugar and spice and everything nice, and that's what girls are made of. Or else, every time you got angry, you got either told to shut up, or the person walked away from you, your parent walked. So pretty soon, you would be conditioned to not feel anger. When you felt it, you'd substitute something else because your caretakers are no anger. Sorry, in this house, you can't do that. So in that sense, the whole childhood, the person cannot express anger. Sometimes we have that, where there's a conditioning process. But more than not, there are events, significant events in the subconscious that create these 7 problems.
Since all the damage to the subconscious occurs before age 7,
Yes.
and let's say that we know that there are a lot of past lives, is there a person nowadays in the modern world without any problem in the subconscious? Is there such a thing?
I think there, yes, the question is there such a thing as a person without problems in the subconscious? Yes, I think so. I haven't met him yet. But because this is planet Earth, it's not planet happiness. It's not called planet happiness, it's planet Earth. And stuff happens, doesn't it? Things happen in 3 ways. There are things that happen to us by accident, okay, that are negative suggestions. Let's say you're a little kid and somebody abducts you. You know, you're 3 years old and you get abducted and you get held for ransom somewhere. That's a very negative, scary event to a child. Then things that happen by accident. You're riding your bike, you know, you're unsupervised, you run in front of a car, boom, pff. Not get killed, but you get knocked silly, you get injured, you go in the hospital. That's a big negative suggestion. And then there are things that happen, that decisions we make, like the golfer. He was not in charge of his mother dying or anything, but he decided, I don't want to be me. It's those decisions that we make. And these are hard to get at in counseling and therapy in general, because they don't come out of this of the conscious mind, out of the pea brain. It's only 1/9 of what's really there. That's why it fails so often. And basically you get drugs and you learn to live with it. This is why I've been on a quest to teach schools and anybody who will listen about how this method works and how well it works. And there's a whole story behind why this has all been abandoned in favor of behaviorism and cognitive behavioral therapy and things like that.
This might be in line with what you just said, but wouldn't it make sense if people who are struggling because many of the things you talked about, one gentleman had PTSD, another person with hallucinations could have been diagnosed with schizophrenia and put on medications and then gotten labeled and gone down. Why do you see that this could be more of an opening and more of a healing process for these individuals than getting locked and labeled in this psychotropic kind of world? And it's so sad.
Well, let me first say this, that medication is useful for people who who lose reality. So I'm talking about the vast majority of people who have these problems. The people who lose reality, it's a small percentage of people. And medication helps them to stay in contact, or if they're suicidal or homicidal or some other thing, that the medication stops that, or people want to cut themselves. It helps in that way. But that said, people who've been on those medications can get help through this method. I've had plenty of people who've come, and I had one woman in particular who came, she was on 4 medications. Her medical doctor sent her in to me because she didn't know what to do with her, and they diagnosed her as bipolar type 2. That meant that she always gets depressed. So anyway, I put her through the whole process. What came out of her is horrendous abuse, trauma, a lot of it. And so that came out, and she changed her whole life. She was an alcoholic, stopped that, went to AA, got sober, has had many years of sobriety now, and is working on healing that abuse. But she's not on all those meds because she dealt with what was going on in here, not the symptom. And that's the sad thing about that model, which is not the medical model. It's, I don't know what it is, but it's what's used, they call it the psychiatric model. There's a book called the DSM-5 where there's 270 labels for people. And so you get a label, and then you get sent to the psychiatrist who gives you the drugs for your label. Now that's not a medical model. The medical model, imagine that. Imagine if you went in to the doctor and you had an appendicitis and the doctor said, hop up here, let me cut you open. Let me see what's going on. Now they wouldn't do that. Or the doctor just guessed. That DSM manual is not a cookbook for healing. It's a label generator. So, and like I said, I think that does help with people if they can't negotiate reality, they can't stay in contact, or they're going to commit suicide. But for the vast majority of people, this medical model, which is a spiritual in essence, is a better alternative than that other stuff, in my opinion. I lived through it.
I think you're a breath of fresh air to the field of therapy. And how are you going to spread your message? Because you know that insurance companies and brief therapy and medications are the thing.
Right. That is definitely the thing. Well, I think we have to it would be nice if schools taught this. And I've approached a couple schools, but they're ensconced in the whole social work, I mean, that's kind of a long story. It started with the medical doctors in the 50s, how Congress gave reimbursement for insurance fees, tax deductions, only for medical. They gave them a monopoly on insurance. So the medical doctors had that during the 50s. The psychologists got wind of that, and they got jealous and petitioned the government, come on, please regulate us so we can get some more of that money too. Okay? Then, in the 80s, the social workers got jealous of the psychologists, and they said, oh, we got to have parity with the psychologists because we deliver most of the treatment. So they petitioned the government to regulate us. And the governments, they're more than happy. Sure, we'll regulate you, no problem. Send us some money. We'll create a regulation. So then the insurance companies are saying, oh, my God, I'm tired of being beat up here. They're taking all our money, all these people, we'll get back at them, we'll create managed care. So they created a separate agency and they said, we're going to send all the clients and reimbursement through you. You negotiate it. So then they negotiated with the providers to cut their fees way down. And then they started limiting the number of sessions. And I think people do get help. I have to say they get help from counseling. I think if you're having a marriage that's dissolving, or you never learn tools for negotiating and being good to yourself and things like that, I think counseling is good for that. But it's not, it doesn't get this stuff out.
I had some questions about EMDR.
Yes.
I had heard that with complex traumas that you were talking about people who needed medication to stay in reality. The way that I heard it explained was in order for EMDR to be successful, they have to be able to stay in a certain state of relaxed awareness.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if you can tell me what you do to help clients of yours who have complex traumas.
That's a good question. Yes, complex trauma. People come in with complex traumas. I don't start doing EMDR or any of that first. I do the hypnoanalysis first. I find out what events are in the subconscious mind that are the earliest ones. And I find the bliss state. And I get them back to that bliss state so that they know there's an event, there's a time in their life where they felt really, really good. That in itself cures a lot of things. Because people with complex trauma feel like they've always been that way. So that I do that first. Complex trauma goes, year by year by year by year. I skip all that and go to the very beginning to start. How many sessions does that look like? Well, it's different within the first month I do that.
Because for one event, don't you have to go through like 8 stages?
No. Okay. No, a person's subconscious mind tells me where their problem started. Even if it's complex trauma, there was a time when it started. It wasn't always there. It began somewhere here. So I find that first, and I go there first, and then to their bliss state, so that they can reclaim that who they really are, their bliss state. And that's the state of who they are, where they can judge their life based on that rather than their trauma. They're not their trauma. See, where EMDR and all that stuff works from the top down, basically. I don't do that. I work from the bottom up.
Do you work with physical modalities as well in your healing, like that incorporate them changing something physically?
I don't do that.
Okay.
No, I don't do physical modalities. We have people in our office who do massage and Tai Chi and Qigong and things like that, yoga. But I don't do that myself. I prefer to do this. And that works, it works very well by going from, you've heard of trickle-down economics, right? Well, it was started by Reagan or one of those presidents, I forget who. But the notion is that you're going to send all the money to the rich people, and it's going to trickle down to all the other people, right? And their lives are all going to be better because the rich people have more money. Does that work? I don't think it works, but I'm not an economist. But trickle-down therapy is the same way. You start with conscious mind and hope it's all going to trickle down to here. Put all the information and new things up here and trickle it down to the subconscious. I know that does not work. You got to start from the bottom up. Imagine a stack of silver dollars now. So I'm above 60 years old. And so let's say we had 60 coins there, 60 silver dollars. Now each one representing a year. Now my first year of life, I had a death experience. So that coin is bent. What's going to do all the other ones? It's going to be the leaning tower. That's how it works. That's why I go to the bottom, straighten out the very first things that happen first. The complex trauma comes later, as a person can deal with it. Once you get some strength in your subconscious mind and you realize that you're not just all this big ball of misery, and you start feeling a little light, then it gives you the wherewithal to deal with more trauma. And I leave it, but see, again, I leave it to the person's subconscious mind through the dream analysis to tell me where to go first.
I have one question that somebody wrote in, and it's on our website. Does this method help people with ADHD and ADD type of disorders?
Well, yes and no. It depends. If the ADD or ADHD symptoms, see that those are symptoms. If it comes from your subconscious mind, we can remove those. If it's not from the subconscious, if it comes from the brain, think about the computer model. A computer is just a projection of our human mind. It's a projection of our brain and our mind. We have software and hardware in a computer. If the software is bad, the computer doesn't operate right. That program doesn't work right. Software is in the subconscious mind. The brain itself has 100 billion neurons, and they all fire from 0 to whatever, 60 times per second. So ADD and ADHD symptoms can be the brain itself is in dysregulation. So I do neurofeedback that helps to get the brain to regulate itself. It's a very cool process. And that's working on the hard drive. You know, if in your computer, if the hard drive isn't working, you don't put more programs on it, right? You don't try and trickle down therapies to it because the hard drive's not working. You got to deal with the hard drive. By the same token, if your software, let's say your software isn't working, you don't put more software on. Another way to say that is this. Inputting, the big difference between this method and other methods is most methods have to do by putting in. Input, input, input. This is not about input. It's about removal. It's about up and out. That's what makes it operate so well. We're reclaiming the bliss state that we all have. We're all human beings. We all started with a sperm and an egg, right? Yes? Anybody not? I think we all started that way, unless we have some test tube babies here, right? So we all started that way. We didn't just come into being. We didn't, so we all started that way, and this is what's inside of us. So it's up and out. It's not about giving input. Most treatment methods have to do about inputting. And that's what hypnotherapy generally is. You hypnotize somebody, give them positive suggestions. But that doesn't work if you have a big negative suggestion here. If you died when your aunt died when you were 8 years old, or whatever it was, whatever the age was, or you are 4 years old and you're being abused by the doctor, and you feel like you have anxiety and you don't feel good around men, positive stuff doesn't work. The subconscious is blocked. It's not taking it in. It has to be removed in the same state that it was created in. When you're under 7 years old, you're in hypnosis. Your brain doesn't make beta. When you're under 7 years old, you're in the alpha theta state, which is hypnosis. So your subconscious here, that's why we go back in time and relive the experience so that with your beta brain, your big brain, your prefrontal cortex, which doesn't develop fully until you're 25, can review it. In my case, that's why when I was a teenager, I couldn't manage my anxiety. All I could do is act out. I couldn't go to school, everything was just way, way above anything. I couldn't handle it. So I'm lucky I'm still alive. Once I got older, in my 20s, my prefrontal cortex came online and said, whoa, hold on here. Let's figure this out. Let's kind of solve this problem. And no amount of input. I went to transactional analysis and Albert Ellis and what's his name, Bandler and Grinder, and I did all these things, reparenting and you name it, I did it. But it didn't do any good because I had this big negative experience when I was under 1. Once I relived that in hypnosis, took power out of it. Yes.
Just if you could recapitulate, the question is, there are 3 ways that things happen to us. One is by accident, the other one is by decisions that we make, but there was a third. The
third one is things that people do to us on purpose. If you grow up in a family and every time you get angry, you get your hand slapped, or by the time we're 18, we've heard no about 50,000 times. Is there any, and we have a negative bias in our brain anyway, so we have a big no. What if we heard yes 50,000 times? Things might be different. So those 3 ways.
Yeah, I'm interested from the practical point of view when you say that you discover the event that triggers something to happen later, because it's happened when the person is like, it's not remembering anything. It's like kind of early in life. So you're putting this person in hypnosis, and after then, like you identify that or the person identify, like, what is
okay, I don't suggest anything. No. That's a no. Conscious memory develops, I think, between 2 and 3 years old, right around there. It's controversial. But before that, we have like a spiritual body memory. See, our soul and spirit's there the whole time, right? It doesn't, it's not gone. It's always, we are it. And the memories from those things are there. It's like a cellular memory, put it that way.
Oh, okay. So it's like kind of the person is identifying the event. It's like you put him in some state, but it's the person that will find out what was causing this. Is
right. Yes, that's right. I put him in the hypnotic state, and then we go back in time, and then the memories they'll start feeling the memories. And some people have some trouble with that, especially if you're very much left brain, I'm sorry. So it takes some people a couple of experiences to learn the nuances of the body and the spiritual feelings. For the guy who went to 5 years old, I said, let's go back to 5 years old, Now, if you honestly step into that experience at 5 where something took place, and do that now, and then they go to it. So I'll lead in that way, but I don't say I didn't know what the experience was. He came up with the experience. And the proof's in the pudding. If we do that and they get better, guess what? It worked. And it doesn't matter whether I believe it, or it does. What matters is that the person believes it and it changes them. And they get their goals, which I write down their goals so that we'll all know when they get there. And that's the important thing. So the person defines what the goals are, and we use this model. It was begun by Dr. William Jennings Bryan Jr. after World War II. He was a medical doctor, a psychologist, and a lawyer. So he was related to the orator who ran for president in 1898. So he developed this method in Los Angeles. And he was treating shell-shocked World War II victims right after World War II. And he trained a bunch of medical doctors in the 70s. And then in the 80s, he died in 74. I got trained by those doctors who he trained in the early 80s.
Are there ways we can access these memories ourselves?
Okay, that's a good question. Are there ways we can access these memories ourselves? Generally not, because there's pain associated with it, and we develop a defense against it. So the best I can suggest you do is that you tell yourself, just before you go to bed, I'm going to have a dream or a thought about the next step in solving my problem. It's really hard to access this stuff on one's own. But by doing the dream, here's what happened to me recently. I had a cold, a little bit of flu. And so I gave myself the suggestion at night, I'm going to have a dream or a thought when I wake up in the morning and tell me what to do about this flu. I did. So I woke up. Here's what's in my mind, feral alcohol. Is that alcohol that comes out of a cat? I didn't know what it was. Does anybody know what it is?
No.
Feral alcohol? So I went on the internet and I looked it up. And what it is, it's called a feral compound. It's made in Jamaica, and it has vitamin D and a bunch of other vitamins in it. And Walmart has a version of it. And so I went and I got it at Walmart. And the next day I asked how long should I take it? It said 2 weeks. So I took it for 2 weeks. I've been healthy ever since. But that's what, I had no idea where that came from. This is how it works. This is what's so amazing about our subconscious mind. This is what Einstein was talking about. We educate the heck out of the pea brain, but we leave the education of the subconscious mind alone. We ignore it. Think about the geniuses in history. Anybody know about Nikola Tesla? There's a car made. He invented electricity. He didn't invent it. He discovered it. Okay, and Edison stole it from him. Edison and Morgan. And anyway, he ended up bankrupt, but he was an amazing genius. He would download his inventions from the spirit world and work it all out in his mind before he ever started doing tinkering. That's how he did it. What about Mozart? By the time he was 10, he wrote all those, whatever they were, sonatas, concertos, or symphonies. And he was very prolific. Where did all that come from? Came from here. How about, I'm sure you can think of other examples of that. Oh, there was a guy in World War II. I just saw this on a program of Ancient Aliens. And I went back, I tried to find it, and I couldn't find it. There's this fella in World War II. He had a dream about a tracking system to shoot down enemy airplanes. This is true. So he had this dream, and it was all laid out for him in his dream, and he went and created this, and that's partly how we won World War II, because we had this really good anti-aircraft tracking system that this fella developed in a dream. So that's my suggestion to all of us. Start making use of this. And how you do that. This is the sleep state. We have 100 billion neurons in our brain. In the sleep state, if we graph it, it's between 1 and 3 times per second, and it looks like that. This is the waking state. And hopefully you're all in the waking state and not in the sleep state yet. So in between is hypnosis. So just before we go to sleep, we're in the waking state, we pass through hypnosis. It's a state everybody knows. And then we go into sleep. When we wake up, we start in the sleep state, we come through hypnosis into the waking state. So that's why, when you're putting yourself to bed, just before you go to sleep, start practicing this. You're already in hypnosis. Tell yourself, I'm going to have a dream or a thought. Something's going to come to me. Some synchronicity is going to happen that's going to whatever. Start doing that with yourself. Start activating this. Why is Tesla and Mozart and the World War II guy and Joseph Smith and why are they any different from us? I don't think they are. Start working on this. That's my suggestion. And to everybody, start working on activating your subconscious mind and your life will get really rich. Sometimes I go into a meditative state. Now, I don't know where I go, but I see things and I don't know what they are. I've never seen them before. I can't tell you, I can't describe them. I'm in that state. I'm somewhere else. It's really cool. I love it when that happens. And sometimes I fly in that state. So activate, get this working for you. The problems you have in your life, put it to here. Forget the pea brain. It's useless. It's, it's good for when you want to write your checks. But think about this. The good things that have come to us in our life, did they come because we organized it by the pea brain? Or do they come serendipitously? From this part, from the larger brain, the 8/9. This is 1/9. So get that operating.